Hello and welcome to my last Sunday sit-down of 2018. This is December 30th of 2018. And today I thought, I don't have like a top 10 list or anything. Some of my Sunday sit-downs are just me talking about a topic for a while. And I thought I would talk about house rules in games from the perspective of a designer and a gamer, and just in general. And I'm kind of just putting out this conversation topic because I'm really curious to hear what you think about house rules in specific games, or your philosophies about house rules and about fun in your group. There's a couple different tangents that I'll take here. I've been gathering little ideas about this topic for a while, but the two things today that kind of made me want to talk about it specifically today is there are a couple things. One is, and this isn't really a house rule, this is actually now an official thing. For a while now, this is related to one of my games, Scythe. So in Scythe, there are these faction mat, player mat combinations. There are 25 different combinations in the base game where you pair a faction mat with a player mat. It's a random combination that happens at the beginning of the game. And we playtested Scythe a ton before we published it, both locally, and there were over 1,000 blind playtests of Scythe. Yet, there was a combination, a faction called Roosfiat and the Industrial player mat, that after the game was published and was played by many, many more thousands of people, it was revealed that this combination was too good, and specifically too good in that a normal game of Scythe that can last between around 18 and 22 turns. That's the average. That's the sweet spot. That's enough time for everyone to have a satisfying experience with Scythe, even if you don't win. But Roosfiat Industrial ended up accelerating the game in that a player with that combination could end the turn in like 13 or 14 turns. We didn't find this in playtesting. It was revealed later, and eventually, after hearing enough people that they had discovered this, that it wasn't just a fluke that it happened in one game. In fact, I even did it myself and had a very unpleasant experience playing with this combination. But mainly after the mounting amount of data that it was just too fast, I decided to ban that combination. For new players, it was okay. For new players, they probably wouldn't even discover it, like someone playing Scythe for the first time. But for an experienced player, I said, you just can't play with this anymore. And that's been the case. Scythe has been out for 2.5 years now. That's been the case up until today. And today, after hearing little bits and pieces here and there about another combination, Crimea Patriotic, I've heard from time to time that people thought it was overpowered. But in general, I heard people finishing a game in about 17 turns with Crimea Patriotic, which is a little fast, but not enough for me to ban it. I've heard from enough people now that they've been finishing it, especially since the Scythe digital game is out. They've been finishing the game with within 14 turns with Crimea Patriotic, that today I decided to officially ban it as well. Now, this isn't a house rule. Obviously, this is a little bit off topic, but it'll come back to the topic. This is an official Stonemaier Games thing saying, don't play with these combinations. You cannot play with these combinations anymore. But the interesting thing to me, this is one of the things that jumped out, in the thread where I posted on Facebook about it, someone said that in their group, that a ton of people have won using this combination. And it surprised me a little bit that they would continue to let that happen. This is the topic that I'm going to get into today. I'm going to express some surprise and some personal opinions. I completely respect yours, and I respect the idea, and I'll get into this deeper, but I respect the idea that you might play very differently in your group than my group. But in my group, when we play games, like the intent, especially for me as the host, if I'm hosting games, is to make sure that everyone, including myself, is having fun. And I don't have very much fun when other people are having fun. So it's all tied together. And part of having fun, I think, is not playing with aspects of games that seem truly overpowered, which happens in games. It happens in these complex games with asymmetry. Hopefully the designers and the publishers figure it out, but they don't always figure it out in advance. And sometimes they publish something, they publish a loophole or a combo that just doesn't work. And if we discover that in my group, I try to push for the idea that we either don't use that thing, or we give a handicap to that player or to the other players. And so it surprised me a little bit to read this comment from someone saying that they've had this happen numerous times in their group, It clearly has impacted the fun in their group. It's become a discussion topic, and yet they've continued to play with that combo. So even without the publisher saying officially don't play with this, I was a little surprised that they wouldn't just not play with it themselves. The other thing that happened today that made me think about this topic is a comment on Twitter from someone who said that they were playing Charterstone, and after game, so Charterstone is another game that I designed and published. Charterstone is a legacy game. We play tested the heck out of it, but there certainly are things that happen in this legacy game in particular where you can combine a few different elements that can be very powerful. And apparently in this group, this person tweeted that one player discovered an overpowered combo, and that player decided upon themselves to continue to use the combo, and it ended up ruining the experience for the other players to the point that all of the other players quit the campaign after game like 7 or 8. And this surprised me in multiple ways. One, that this player would hopefully see that they were making the experience less than ideal for the other players, and that they continue to play that way. And the other side of it is that instead of deciding as a group, we're not going to let you do this anymore. Like we're just going to ban this combo. Or coming to me and saying, "Hey, Jamey, will you ban this combo for our group? Will you give us the official word that we're going to ban, that we shouldn't play with this combo?" Instead of doing that, they actually just stopped playing the game, which again is partly my responsibility as the designer and the publisher. Hopefully, I could find these things and eliminate them so that players don't have this type of experience. But it still surprised me that instead of just taking out, but probably like 2 cards, They quit the game. They quit the campaign completely. They let it impact their experience that much. And so I guess part of this topic, I think, is about player responsibility. Like, do you feel like you have a responsibility to yourself and to your group to make changes in games if they are impacting your experience that much that you would quit playing a game or quit playing a campaign game due to maybe just a few cards, literally, that you could just remove from the game? So that's one overarching topic. And those are the things that made me think about this, maybe decide to actually talk about this topic today. One of the things I want to talk about is house rules that I use. I very rarely house rule a game. There are examples that I have forgotten that I won't mention today. I can think of a few that I will mention on camera today. But I very rarely do it because I generally assume that the designer included certain things in the game for a reason, or included everything in the game for a reason. I don't assume that the designer actually was able to playtest every little instance of every little thing. So there are anomalies that I understand might just be things that they didn't account for. But they usually end up being anomalies. What I have found is that there are certain instances of games where I am not interested in the final score, where we kind of just house ruled the end of the game. And those are the examples that I'll give today. The first is A Fake Artist Goes to New York, one of my favorite games. I love this game. But there are rules in this game for that create these very firm constructs at the end of the game for like scoring and deciding who wins. And we found fairly early on that playing that way just wasn't all that interesting. A Fake Artist Goes to New York is a game where you are, it's like Spyfall kind of, where you're collectively drawing a picture where one person doesn't know what you were drawing and everyone else knows. And at the end of the game, you try to identify who that person is, who the fake artist is. And there's this weird point system in the game, and we were just like early on, we realized it isn't as fun to play with that way. But it's a beautiful, wonderful game. We want to keep playing this game. And so we play with a more organic end, where at the end of the game, you just point at all the other players. You do the thing that you do in many of these types of games, where you just point simultaneously. And you give if the fake artist is selected, they get a chance to just name what the picture is. And if they can name it, they win the game. And that has worked for our group. And this is one of the wonderful things about house rules, I think. What works for my group might work very differently for another group. That's just the nature of house rules. That our house is different than your house. My house is different than yours. Another one is Telestrations. I am pretty sure there's a point system in Telestrations. I don't care to even look it up because Telestrations, I guess we technically play it more as an activity than a game. And I'm okay with that. I love this game. I have had so many hours of laughter playing Telestrations. It's this game of telephone where you're drawing on a pad and then you pass it to the next player. They write what they think it is and they pass it to the next player. I'm not interested in the final score. I'm interested in the laughter. The goal of the game is to laugh with my friends. And hopefully have a few clever moments where you draw something that's unexpectedly good or unexpectedly bad. So I'm not interested in that. So I don't even know if anyone plays that way with Telestrations. The last example is a little bit less of a party game, and that is Blokus. Probably my favorite abstract game. In Blokus, I think there actually is a point system at the end of the game. But the way that we've pretty much always played is that the player who has the fewest squares at the end of the game is the winning player. And I think the end of Blokus is pretty similar to that, but I think there's also a greater point system that you can use. But I like how streamlined this ending is, that you just count your squares at the end of the game. Those are the house rules that I can think of. Oh, and there's one more. I forgot to pick up the game, but Terra, you can kind of see it down there. Terra Mystica is on my shelf down there. Terra Mystica is way more complex than any of these games that I've given examples for. We do, and we played it a ton. We love Terra Mystica. But there is a little thing that we do differently than the rules say, and that is in Terra Mystica you have this pool of power that you're moving around and using. It's a brilliant mechanism of a resource, kind of a renewable resource in a game. The way we play it, I think the official way of playing Terra Mystica is that you can only cycle power on your turn, unless another player gives you power when it's not your turn. Maybe you can only spend power on your turn. I think that's what it is. You can only spend power on your turn. So it's when in the third pool, if you want to convert power to like money, you can only do that on your turn. However, we have found that both during the income phase and sometimes when it's not your turn, you reach certain situations where maybe your third pool is full of power and you would gain more power. And so we allow players to spend that power on the basic stuff like the coins, the workers, the priests, when it's not their turn, to allow players to get that power out of pool 3 so that they can still receive it later. And this just makes it nicer. I mean, it's just a nicer way to play than the official version, because in the official version you end up not having you reach certain circumstances where you would be able to gain power, but you can't because all your power is already in pool 3. So it's just a tiny little tweak, but we like to play that way in our group. I have a few other examples here, but let me jump back to like the big picture for a second, which is how I feel and why I'm a little hesitant to talk about house rules, because how I feel as a designer when people post house rules to my games. And actually, for the most part, I am totally fine with people. I've come to terms with this over my lifespan as a designer. I've come to terms with people posting house rules, and I no longer take it personally that someone in their group might want a slightly different experience than the one I've designed. I'm totally fine with that. I totally encourage house rules. The two things that I don't like completely as a designer is if someone comes to me on an online forum or privately, especially not privately, and says, "Hey, we've decided to house rule this thing in our group. What do you think?" And my answer is always, I want you to find the most fun experience for you and your group. But I designed the game this way. And so I don't really comment on house rules. Like if you want to play it your way, I totally appreciate that. I totally applaud that. But I designed these things for a reason. There is a reason for here. I'm happy to explain that reason to you if you want. But I'm not going to rate whether or not your house rule is worth playing. That's totally you. That's your group. That's your choice. The way that I would recommend playing is the way that I wrote it in the rule book, right? And the other thing that can maybe get under my skin a little bit is what was the other thing? Maybe I didn't have another thing. I thought I had two. So it's one when people ask me to comment on it. And two, the second one is when people suggest a house rule and want my opinion on it without actually having played with it. I think and so I always say, like, play with it first, and then decide whether or not if you want to suggest it to other people. It's fine to bring up an idea as an idea, but really, like with any game, you don't know if something works unless you actually try it. So I highly prefer for someone, if they do have a house rule that they want to bring up, that they that they try it first, that they try that house rule first and see if it actually works. Because I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, they play with that house rule and they're like, oh, okay, it doesn't work. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for why the game is the way it is. I actually think there was one time, there was one instance I can think of where I did that myself, and I kind of look back on it with a little bit of shame. It was a game called, I think, Dice. It wasn't Dice Forge. It was a game about like amassing dice and rolling a bunch of dice and forging weapons. It wasn't Dice Forge though. And there was a little weird, like I was reading the rules and I was like, this seems a little weird. Like, why would the designer choose this? And I asked it in the group and got an answer about it. I shouldn't have done it though. I should have played it first and then asked the question. But I did. I'm human too. So, a few other topics here related to this. Okay, so one is in escape room games and games like Time Stories. So games where, actually, let's do escape room games first. We play a bunch of these escape room games. We played Exit recently. We played a few of the Unlock games, and in one of the Unlock games we were playing, in these games you can look up clues if you want, and it can count against your final score. But you can do it. Like the game includes clues that you can request, and if you really can't solve a puzzle, you can just get the answer. And so we were just really stuck in one of these games, these Unlock games. It was one on like a pirate island, and we couldn't figure it out. And so, but there's one person in our group who really doesn't like to look up the answer. Their take is, even if everyone's having a terrible time, we have to figure it out as a group. And I totally get that sentiment. That's the point of these games, these escape room games, that you try as a group to solve the answer. But we were really stuck. I mean, we were stuck for like 20 minutes where we just could not figure out this thing. And it was, from my perspective, it was ruining the experience. And so I covertly went on the app and looked up the answer. And then I revealed it to the group, not so covertly. I kind of just, I gave us some hints to move us in that direction. And this one player found out that I had done this, and he will now refuse to play any of these games with us because he doesn't like having the answer, which I totally understand. Maybe I shouldn't have done this thing. Maybe I shouldn't have looked up the answer. Or I should have at least said, as a group, we're going to decide this or not. I'm not going to take this upon myself. But I was kind of looking after the fun of the group. My intentions were good. But I'm curious what you do in this instance with escape room games. Will you let yourself ever look up the answer? Not that this is kind of a house rule, but this is kind of like keeping the fun in mind. Will you ever look up the answer as you keep the fun in mind? And I would say this. I would say my inclination, obviously my inclination is to do it, but my preference, I think, is to do it and then offer more effective clues to the players. Like, if the clues have not helped you up to that point, to the point that you need an answer, then I would rather have one player, myself or someone else, but just one player, look up the answer and then offer more direct clues, more helpful clues, so that the game can keep moving along and that we can continue to have fun with it. That is my preference in these games. For me, that does not ruin the experience, because I don't want an hour-long escape room game to last for 2 hours. I don't want that to happen. I think that can really hurt the fun of it if it lasts too long. The other kind of example of this is in Time Stories. Time Stories is a game where you run through a loop multiple times, and it is my favorite game. It's one of my favorite games. And one of the reasons I think it's remained one of my favorite games is that there are times in Time Stories where we don't run through the whole loop. Like, maybe we get like a die roll away from winning, and we don't make it. And instead of running through the entire loop and extending the game for another 30 minutes that we don't need to play, we just jump back to that spot, and we do it again. And I think this is fine. Like, in our group, this is fine. I understand that, again, I'm curious about your opinions, what you do in your group, if that is fine to you, or if you blame the designer or the publisher for making you do that. But I am fine in my group with doing that, to jumping forward for the sake of fun, like keeping fun in mind and making that the most important thing. And I don't blame the game for it. Obviously, Time Stories is one of my favorite games. I do not blame the game for asking us to do another loop. Rather, I see it as our responsibility as the players in my group to find the fun, to maximize the fun, and to eliminate certain things that aren't as fun when they happen, which does happen in Time Stories if you need to run that extra loop at the end based on a bad roll. One last one, are mulligans in games, or takesy-backsies, when a player makes a mistake and they want to take it back. Again, in my group, I play for the fun. I want players to have fun, and if their game is going to be ruined by a decision they made and they haven't already taken another turn, so it hasn't come all the way back around to them, I am all for a player taking back a thing that they did to make a better mistake. Now, if they're doing this on every turn, that can become a problem because you're playing competitively. Part of the fun is that you are competing for the win, right? But if it happens once or twice, in my group, I'm all about the rule of just like letting the player do the fun thing, the thing that really will have an impact on their experience of the game, and letting them take back that decision. As you can see for me, all of this really comes down to fun. That's something I keep in mind when I design, like how can I find the fun in this? What is the most fun thing that we can do here? And it's the same when I host my game night. What are the things that can make this experience the most fun for other players? Even last night, I was playing a game that was a little over my head. It was lasting a little bit too long for me. And I had a choice. This isn't even with house rules, but I had a choice. I could bring down the game. I could show everyone how little fun I was having by the end of the game. Or I could pretend that I was having a great time and let everyone else continue to have a great time as well. And that's what I did. Like I didn't want to bring down the group just because I wasn't having the best time, especially because the game was almost over by this point. And so that's a little divergent from the idea of house rules and mulligans and looking up answers in escape room games. But it does come back to this core idea of finding the fun when I play games with my friends and when I design games. I've jumped around a lot here. I know this is kind of a rambling Sunday sit down, but I would love to hear your thoughts about your approach and your group, especially for competitive games. For cooperative games, I think we always have a little bit more flexibility here, but with competitive games, what do you do in your group? Like, is fun by far the top thing that you prioritize? And have you created house rules based on that goal? Or are there other things that you prioritize? I completely respect that. That impacts your decision to allow or disallow things like house rules and looking up answers and mulligans and takesy-backsies and things like that. I'm curious what your take is in your group. And also, if you're a designer, what's your perspective on all of this as well? Thank you for joining me for the last Sunday Sit Down of 2018, and I'll be back next week to talk about a different topic. I don't know what it is yet, but we'll find out next week. Take care.